Welcome, class. Today we're going to explore a political ideology. We're going to find out what does it mean to be politically left, what does it mean to be politically right, and the type of people and groups that you tend to find in those two places. First things first, let's talk about the political spectrum. So this image right here shows you a fairly common representation of how people plot out or represent different political views that people might have. And you'll notice that it is a spectrum. It's a way to classify someone's individual political beliefs across a broad range. And the two major areas that people tend to focus on is the left and the right. And we give labels for those different spots on this spectrum. The left matches up with liberal ideology, and the right matches up with conservative ideology. Now, an individual person's place on the political spectrum could be anywhere. They could be someone on the far left, way over here, someone on the far right, way over here, someone in the middle. And there's also another scale or another axis that might determine their view when it comes to other areas. So they could end up somewhere down here in the individualism quadrant, or somewhere way up here. But what puts a person's spot on the political spectrum, where it lands, is that person's beliefs, their values about really two questions. Here are the two questions. First, it's a person's emphasis on either individualism, in other words, how much they value themselves, versus a person's communalism, how much they value their community. And then the other factor that helps a person determine where they end up is their belief in the role of government. Do they believe that the government should be a powerful and involved force in people's lives, or a small and uninvolved force in their lives? These are the factors that will determine a person's spot and where they happen to land on this spectrum. So we've got two big broad categories that we're going to focus on: the left, or the liberals, and the right, or the conservatives. And I've broken it down on the screen into two sides of the screen. You've got the liberal information over here. You've got the conservative information over here. And you can break those down on your notes as you follow along. But the way to sort of understand what liberals and conservatives value and how they're different from one another is to go back to those two original questions. What do they think about individualism? What do they think about communalism? What do they think about the role of government? When it comes to liberals value freedom when it comes to their personal choices or in social issues, but they are okay with government involvement in the economy. And for conservatives, it's essentially the reverse. Conservatives are okay with the government being involved in social issues, someone's personal choices, but they are they fiercely value economic freedom. They want the government to stay out of their economic affairs and their economic choices. So if you think about different ideas in more specific terms, you see that there's a list of things that liberals value when it comes to social choices and of course economic ideas as well. And they all match up with this idea of personal independence when it comes to choice and freedom, and social independence, but government involvement when it comes to the economy. So you have things like pro-choice and marriage equality, decreased restrictions on drug use. These are all things that liberals believe a person can make their own personal choice about without anybody telling them what to do, particularly the government. But if you look down here in the economic area, you'll notice that liberals back up things that put the government heavily involved in our economy. Welfare programs, things like government paid for health care and that kind of stuff. Business restrictions, particularly when it protects the environment. And liberals also tend to be okay with higher taxes, particularly on the rich. You'll also notice that liberals tend to vote for, in this day and age, for Democratic Party candidates. Check out how the right breaks down. Most conservatives are the kind of people that value traditional ideas about things like marriage or other behaviors, and they're typically okay with the government stepping in and promoting a particular picture of that behavior. Like marriage should be limited to that between certain people or something else along those lines. But at the same time, conservatives value a free market economy where businesses are unrestricted, people can make lots of money, people can control their own wealth, and people don't have to pay a lot of taxes. Conservatives tend to vote for Republican Party candidates. So now that we have those two groups distinguished from one another, let's look at who demographically in the United States tends to fit into each group. Now remember, we're painting with a broad brush here. Just because we identify one group or another with a particular ideology, it doesn't mean that everybody in that group happens to follow that pattern. It just means that that's the tendency that we happen to see when we examine how these groups behave when it comes to expressing their political opinions. So if you look here, you'll notice that women tend to be more liberal. They tend to vote for Democratic candidates, and they tend to have more liberal viewpoints on issues. Now, this does not mean that every woman is a liberal. It just means that women tend to, as a group, lean more toward the left or the liberal side. And conversely, men tend to lean more to the right and be more conservative. You can notice the pattern with how people vote or how people respond to surveys or polling questions. And again, this does not mean that everyone of that group belongs to that mentality. It just means that that is the trend. Moving on with this trend, let's look at how people in different places fit into ideological groups. Here's the breakdown. The map that you're looking at here shows you a map of the United States. Blue areas are areas where voting for Democrats is strong, and red areas are parts of the country where voting for Republicans tends to be more common. So you can see just how things are spread out around the country. And what I hope you're noticing is that the blue areas, think about here in the Northeast or here along the West Coast, blue areas tend to be places where it's more urban. There are more cities, more people living closer together. And then these big patches of red out here are rural areas. And that's the breakdown when it comes to region of the country or the geographical area that you come from. Conservative voters tend to be found in rural areas like the South or the Midwest, and liberal voters tend to be found in urban areas such as the bigger cities along the East Coast or the West Coast. Once again, this does not mean that everybody who lives in those places falls into that label. This is just the trend. When it comes to race and ethnicity, Black, Asian, or Latino voters tend to be more liberal. White voters tend to be more conservative, just as a group, when you measure their voting behavior. You can see on this chart right here that African American voters tend to be overwhelmingly liberal and vote for Democrats. And that is a very apparent trend over the last several decades of measuring voters' behavior when it comes to elections. There's also a difference between age groups. Younger voters tend to side more with liberal ideology and vote for liberal candidates, whereas older Americans tend to be more conservative and vote for Republican. You can see that evidence here on this chart. The bar that you see here for younger voters, people who are 18 to 24 years old, they're voting almost twice as often for liberal candidates as they do for conservative candidates. But as we age up, you'll notice that the red, which is representing the conservative vote, gets larger as we go. There's also a distinction based on religion. Some religious groups will favor conservative ideology, and other religious groups will favor liberal ideology. The conservative religious groups are people like evangelical Christians and some Catholic voters. Religious groups that lean more toward the liberal side include Jewish voters and also some Catholic voters. Education plays a role. Notice that the more education you get, the more likely you are to be liberal. College-educated people tend to be more liberal than non-college-educated people. And there's even a distinction based on occupation. People who work in jobs related to office work or business work, what we refer to as white-collar jobs, tend to be more liberal. They tend to vote Democrat. Whereas people who work in trades or labor, jobs that we refer to as blue-collar jobs, tend to be more conservative and vote Republican. The amount of money you make may also be a source of distinction in your ideology. People who make lots of money and are wealthier also tend to be more conservative. People who do not make as much money, do not have as much wealth, tend to be more liberal. So make sure your notes are well organized and take a few moments to answer the follow-up questions at the bottom of your notes. We will discuss what you found out in class. Thank you very much.